Welcome to Vibrational Revelations. I'm Elena.
I am Alejandro.
And today we have a very special guest, a friend of mine, Eric Edmeades, somebody I've met, I think it's been like 5 years ago, at Mind Valley's A-Fest. And actually, I remember one thing about you that I thought was amazing. I had no idea at that time that you were traveling to Africa, which brings us to the reason why we're having this conversation. But what I loved after I met you is listening to you talk on stage. I was actually sharing with Alejandro about this because you didn't wear shoes. And you were just so much in the flow. And you were so personable. And I thought, this is probably the best talk. I can't even remember what you were presenting about, but it was the best presentation ever because there were no slides and you just made everyone feel comfortable. And I thought, wow, this guy knows really how to be on stage. So I had no idea that you were doing all these other things. So please share about you. And then, of course, we'll dive into why we're here today.
Sure. I was born in South Africa and kind of raised in Canada, and went through a lot of really serious health problems in my youth. And one day, sitting with a bunch of friends, we're having a conversation about food and good and bad diets and stuff, which is a conversation everybody has these days, but not so many people were having this conversation back in 1991 or something. And I decided to try a little experiment, and I changed some rules about my life, the way I ate, the way I lived, and what have you. And a month later, I'd lost 35 pounds and I'd eliminated all my problems. And so I started becoming pretty damn curious about our relationship with food and our psychology about food and our relationship with medicine. You know, I actually got quite frustrated. I'd spent almost 10 years visiting doctors, getting pills prescribed and injections and even surgery. And it was all this stuff to fix all the problems, and none of it fixed anything. And yet 30 days of just changing my life a little changed everything. So that sort of started me on what might be now about a 30-year journey, delving into sort of human history and trying to figure out why it is that we have all these modern diseases and that sort of stuff. And in the meantime, I've been involved in lots of different businesses, from wireless networking to Hollywood special effects to 3D engineering and military research and development. And then one day I decided that I didn't want to live indoors running businesses anymore. And I wanted to get out and teach, which is, how you came to see me at A-Fest and ultimately what leads to me being here with you now. And of course, a big part of my research in this scope of human lifestyle was to travel to Africa and spend a lot of time with the Hadza people, who are, like proper nomadic hunter-gatherer people. So that's been a real highlight of the last 10 years of my life for sure.
Amazing. And the reason I reached out to you, of course, because your picture came to me, I'm like, I've seen you with a tribe, and I wonder if it's the Hadza tribe. Alejandro and I have been looking into, of course, what's happening globally right now, but it's been happening for many, many, many years. And we've measured the collective consciousness of human immune system. And we were looking back all the way to pre-germ theory. And this is where we recognize that the frequency has shifted. So pre-germ theory, which germ theory vibrates at a frequency of 100, which is fear. And this is where we stand as the collective human immunity, right? So we have this really messed up relationship with how we view our health, our body, and therefore the fear we have of who we are. And then we looked at the terrain theory, which is interestingly enough, vibrates at a frequency of 525, which is love. So we said, okay, there must be something to it. We wanted to look at all the different types of people, populations that live around the world. Who has the key? Who holds the secret to this human collective immune system frequency that is high? And we looked at Blue Zone, we looked at Scientologists, we looked at Amish people, which is interesting. Amish people's frequency is 100. So you would think they're in a way living in a separate, in their own unique communities, but yet their frequency of the immune system is very similar to ours, identical to ours. The Blue Zone people vibrate, as far as the immunity, at 200 frequency, which is the frequency of courage. This is the first step where you recognize you're actually connected to yourself and therefore connected to the collective. Island of Ikaria 350, which is the frequency of acceptance. And the only group we tested that has the frequency of love, which is identical to the frequency of the terrain theory, is the Hadza tribe people. So it brings us to you, my friend. And I want to know the secret. So when you go and you visit the Hadza tribe, how long do you stay there? What would you say? Well, let's begin there. How long do you go there for? I know you said 10 years you've been going there.
I've been going for 10 years, and my visits range from anything from a day or two to a week or two. My longest stays have been in the week or two range, where I've actually embedded and stayed with them and lived with them. And, you know, like, I don't even take food. I just go and take my chances. And so those trips are very demanding and very difficult. My most recent trip was only 4 or 5 weeks ago. And I'll tell you, you know, I can't speak to the measurement of, you know, fields and what have you, but what I can tell you is that one of the guides that I've been traveling there with for a long time, he on my very first visit, he's like, "Oh, you got to come see the school that I'm building." And listen, I've climbed Kilimanjaro like 7 times, and every porter and every guide has some school or orphanage they're building. And most of them are, you know, it's like good intent, but it's just a way of getting extra tips. Honestly, like, you know, there's a lot of that. And so my guide kept saying, "Oh, you got to come see the school that I'm building." And at this point, I'm so jaded that I just keep blowing him off. And about 5 years ago, he organized an itinerary for me. And weirdly, it had half day free, like in travel. It was like, "Well, oh yeah, there's a bunch of," he goes, "Well, look at that. We have all this time. You know what we should do? We should go visit my school." And I'm like, "Oh, you bugger." Like he totally, but at least it means there's a real school, right? So we go off to the school and we get there. Now, I have done a lot of work in schools and visited many schools and orphanages in Tanzania over the last 15 years. And so we get to this school and I see the most gorgeous little school, but here's what I really see: healthy kids. Healthy, active kids. And I'm like really intrigued by that, because I'm telling you, in most of the schools, the diet is absolutely deplorable. The kids are malnourished for certain, and you can see it in them, in their eyes and in their bellies, and you can just see it. But these kids, no, full of spark and doing really well in school and all this stuff. So I said, "What's going on with these kids? Why are they so healthy?" And he goes, "You don't know?" And I said, "No, I don't know." And he goes, "You don't remember?" "No, I don't remember. What should I be remembering?" And he goes, "The very first time that we went to visit the Hadza people, I asked you why you like visiting them. And you said that you believe that most of the pain, suffering, and disease that's being experienced in the modern world is because we live differently than the environment we evolved in. And so the more we can learn from the Hadza people, the healthier we're going to be." And he said, "So I heard you say that around the fire one night. So when I built my school, I made a decision to try to mimic as closely as possible the diet of the Hadza people for the kids in the school. That's why they look like that."
And what is the diet like?
Well, you know, I think that before getting to that, there's some other really important principles. You know, everybody wants to go, "Well, once you know that, what should I eat every day?" Well, it's not really simply about food and lifestyle. There's an expression that I've developed for some writing that I'm doing at the moment. It's called the evolution gap. And the concept of the evolution gap is that there are 2 types of evolution that happen in a species like humans. One is genetic evolution. Slowly over time, small genetic errors are either accepted or declined by nature in natural selection, and you have evolution. But that's a process that takes hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years to show up as major traits or certainly new species. But there's another type of evolution, which is the evolution of ideas. And just to give you an idea of the mathematical magnitude here, if you have a million human beings and one of them has a mutation that seems to work well in the environment, that mutation is at max going to show up in his or her offspring in the next generation, 3 or 4 people. And then it's going to show up max at 9 people in the next generation, right? Like it's very, very slow, but an idea can spread laterally in the same generation immediately. So somebody invents the bow and arrow, suddenly 300 people are using the bow and arrow. That's 300 times the velocity of speed. And so what has happened to us is that we've changed our social structure, civilization, and technology way faster than our genetic evolution could keep up with. And so now there's this gap that's been opened. And that gap is why our immune systems are stressed. It's why our endocrine systems are stressed. And it's why we have so much illness and disease and emotional suffering. And so studying the Hadza is, I don't want to overly romanticize the idea that they live the way our ancestors lived, but I don't think anybody would argue that the way they live is the closest thing on earth that we've got to the way our ancestors lived. And so here's a great example. Long before you talk about diet, I was with them 4 or 5 weeks ago, And we're running along. We've done about 20 miles of tough terrain while we're hunting. And it suddenly dawns on me that every single thing that they do in their life to gain pleasure is a survival strategy. In other words, for them, the reward system, their dopamine and serotonin development is a direct match with survival. For them, hedonism is a survival strategy. We have the same innate reward system. Every human being has an innate and an acquired reward system. Innate is built right into you. And then acquired is your mom gave you a cookie when you fell over and now you learned that cookies heal pain, right? That's the learned one. But they have the same innate reward system that we have effectively. And so we take our reward system and try to live in a world with Instagram and Coca-Cola, caffeine, sugar, and processed foods and all this kind of stuff. And in other words, our compass keeps telling us go in that direction, but it's the wrong direction. And that's why we're suffering as big as we are. It's not simply about food. It's about our psychology and our evolved responses and that sort of stuff. The way they live, if they seek pleasure, oh, look, honey, they seek pleasure. Honey's good for them. They want to go hunting. They seek pleasure. They enjoy both the hunting and the success of hunting. All of those things generate pleasure for them. And all of those things ensure their survival and propagation. For us, I mean, on any given day, a teenager spends 80% of their time seeking pleasure that's destructive to their being. Mm. That's the problem.
Mm. Yes. Mm. What do you think is keeping the Hadza tribe people away from electronics and civilization? What is it that is?
You know, they're smart. And it's interesting. You say the Amish are vibrating at the same level of us. Now, without understanding your technology or any of that kind of stuff, all I could tell you is this. The Amish have sort of attempted to do something along the lines of the Hadza. They're saying, we don't want to be interfered with, but all this stuff, but they're doing it from a perspective of fear. They fear technology, right? They fear it. They fear modern medicine and all that kind of stuff. So it's still coming from a position of fear. They're not choosing their Amish lifestyle because it's so bloody enjoyable, at least not in the experiences that I've had. They're choosing that lifestyle because they think to choose otherwise has consequence, right? It's different. The Hadza have definitely routinely been lured away from their lifestyle by misguided missionaries and government agencies that are trying to get them to develop ID cards or want them to eat the way they want them to eat. And here's some alcohol for that matter. And effectively the way it works is this. Hey, here, you Hadza family, you can come live in this mission and we'll give you free food. And they're like, free food. Their dopamine receptors like the idea of free, no effort, free food. Seems like a good plan. But then they go there and then in exchange for the free food, they have to sit through some sermons. Now the food isn't so free anymore. And then the sermons are deciding how they're supposed to live. This food is definitely not free. Now they're told they have to go wash the dishes and they have to have a job in order to get the food. And pretty soon the free food isn't free at all. And they look at this and go, I don't like this. And they leave. Now, the difference is that your ancestors and my ancestors slowly screwed that up. And we didn't watch it. We didn't notice it happening. It just happened to us oh so slowly. But for them, it's like taking them from 250,000 years ago and putting them in 2020. And that's just too shocking. And I would say that any of your ancestors that were taken from their lifestyle in the bush, under the stars, in the wilderness, and you suddenly brought them here where they have to worry about paying bills, they wouldn't like it either.
So what is a shock for you to go back to 250,000 years ago and experience life with them?
Yeah, but it's a pleasant shock. Mm. It's a pleasant shock. Now, it's only a pleasant shock if you're in relatively good condition, because frankly, the average person in the Western world wouldn't survive 3 days with the Hadza. Like they just wouldn't. They don't have the stamina, the physical fitness, or what have you. But if you've got those things, when you get there, the first day you're like, oh, this is really weird and tough. And the third day you're kind of like, I don't really want to leave anytime soon. You know, you're falling asleep to the sound of a crackling fire, which your DNA has been doing for arguably 2 million years. And the food that you're eating is completely unadulterated. Nobody has interfered with it at all. It's just exactly the way your ancestors always ate it. And the stars are brighter than you've ever seen. And they're there in the sky, just like they were for 99% of your history. Honestly, I think what happens when you go there is your DNA goes, oh, I'm home. I think I had a bit
amazing.
I hope you got me.
Yeah, that's okay. We heard you. Oh, I'm home. So would you say, do you physically prepare like ahead of time to spend time with Hadza tribe before you get there?
Yeah, I do. I got a harsh lesson once a few years ago. I went to visit them. And it was my first time staying for a whole week, and I didn't take any food. I took water because I'm not an idiot, but that's like, but I didn't take food, which means I might still be an idiot. And so I got there with them, and on the first day, and the chief and I are quite good friends. Like we know each other. Like I've had actually recently some guys were making a documentary, and they went there to make the documentary, and they mentioned my name, and the chief was like, "So you know him out there in the real world?" We're good buddies. And so one morning he woke me up and he goes, "Time to go hunting." Now I've been hunting with them at this point many, many times. But what I didn't know is that I had done light hunts with them, just light hunts in around the camp, but they do attrition hunts or long distance hunts. So this morning we get up to go hunt. I look at them. None of them are carrying water, so I don't take any water. They must have a plan. Well, I carry a tracker with me. There's no cell signal out there, but I carry a tracker with me. So I have an idea, like a pedometer, I should say, so I can keep track of the distance. Well, there comes this point where I realize that we have done 25 miles and we have not had water. And it's 105 degrees outside. And this is not the easiest terrain you can imagine. It is unbelievable. This is the hardest marathon you could ever run. And I'm at 25 miles and we've been at it all day. And I suddenly am like, I don't know how I'm going to make it. I haven't had water. It's super hot. We've done 25 miles. I don't know. And then we were walking along and we stumbled upon a Datoga farm. And the Datoga are another tribe that live there, but they're not hunter-gatherer. They're pastoralists, agriculturalists. They keep livestock and they grow things. So they have a trough with water in it. And all the bushmen like lean down onto their knees and they move the cow and pig slime out the way and just drink right out of the trough. And I can't do it. Even though I feel like I might die from thirst, I just can't. I can't drink my water through the slime. I just couldn't do it. Luckily, we were only about 2 miles away from camp. So I got to camp and I drank 2 full liters of water without taking a breath. I was so parched. But at the same time, I was high. I was so high. I had just done something that our ancestors have been doing for hundreds of thousands of years. And I had done it raw, the way they do it. And it was a truly compelling experience. Since then, I've learned that before I go there, I want to just make sure I've topped up a little my cardio. And also what I'll tend to do, and I'll just address what I mean here a little bit more in a minute. But the human body evolved to survive seasons, but also to utilize them. And a lot of people don't understand this when they talk about diet. And so what I do is I go into a season that's designed to put on a little bit of subcutaneous fat so that when I go there, I have stored energy and I have stored water because I know I might not get to eat very much and I'm going to have to work real hard.
Wow. Amazing. I can only imagine. So men are the ones that are hunting. And what do women do during those times?
Yeah. This is a really interesting and maybe a little bit controversial discussion because, it's so like when John Gray came along with Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, it was like, oh my God, the genders aren't different. They're equal. Well, they're different and equal as far as I'm concerned. I've seen them both with their clothes off and they're definitely different. That's my opinion. But I do believe that, there's all this conversation about nature and nurture. I have a 4-year-old little girl and I can tell you her mom is not the most like dress up in high heels, makeup, all that stuff. It's just not her thing. And this little girl came out wanting to wear high heel shoes. Like I don't even know where I'll tell you how we figured it out. We had some of these like traffic cones, like miniature kid traffic cones. And one day she managed to slip them onto her feet going into the pointy end and walk around the house on the points of them. Like she just loves shoes and stuff. There's this whole question of nature versus nurture. And what I want to suggest is that it is absolutely both. And that, we talked about pleasure systems, right? So the men, their pleasure system gives them pleasure for hunting. They love it. The women wouldn't like it. They don't like it. They don't want to walk that far. They don't enjoy long hours in silence. They don't enjoy that, but the men really do. So their neurotransmitters are wired to reward them for doing stuff that's going to improve the odds of survival. Here's a great example. I think little boys are born with if I can hit the target with this rock, I get a little jolt. Right? Like now women can learn that. There's no question about it. Women can learn it, but I don't think they're born with it the same way because for hundreds of thousands of years, little boys needed that because hunting was absolutely hunting and defense, both of which like throwing and aiming in a projectile are useful in both of those instances. It had to be hardwired into them. And so I think that there are definite there's definite reward system differences in women. And you really see it when you go there. The women are, and by the way, there's no hierarchical thing here. It's not like there's no God, man, woman rubbish that we see imposed upon many of our cultures. No, there is the women are responsible for the things they're responsible for, and the men are responsible for the things they're responsible for. Women have veto over the stuff that they're responsible for. Men have veto over the stuff. There's no hierarchy here. I asked the chief once. They move all the time, right? They don't have villages. They have camps, and they move depending on the conditions and the game and the water and all that kind of stuff. You would presume that that's a man decision. Man chooses house. Man chooses home. Man with club takes woman home. No, I asked, I said, how do you guys decide when to move the village? And he goes, oh, the women decide that totally. It's just, it's the women's thing. They decide when it's time to move the village. Why? Because they're responsible for the area around the village. And the Hadza, the men, they're responsible for the space outside the village. So they don't really care where the village is. So the women are at home most of the time. They're tending children. They're gathering. They dig up root vegetables. They harvest berries. They do work, like they make beadwork and that kind of stuff. And they do a lot of talking. A lot of talking going on. You know, it's all day long. You just hear it at their fire the whole time. You can hear the men over there. Sometimes somebody talks. Sometimes somebody plays an instrument. But during the day, the men don't really do a whole lot if they're not hunting. And then what's really crazy is the minute the sun goes down, the women are silent. Like they don't say a thing. They whisper. It's deadly silent. But the men, they start talking. They start talking, you know, like telling stories and making animal noises and all that kind of stuff. So there's definitely some differences in their behaviors, and it's not like anybody's imposing it upon them. I asked, like, what if a woman wanted to hunt? And he's like, if she can keep up and do it, she should hunt. There's nobody telling her not to. They just don't want to.
Well, would you say that women, while it requires intuition, is an important aspect, right, for both of them? But would you say it's because the reason that women make decisions about moving camps is because intuitively they're tuned into nature and knowing where to? No,
I think that would be a fabulous idea, and it would, all the incense burning and crystal wearing people would love it to be that way. They would absolutely love it. No, it's much more simple. When humans live in a given area for long enough, and they're peeing and pooping, and then the area starts to become less clean. And so they gauge that level of cleanliness, and they make the decision once there's maybe a little bit of a smell in the camp, or there's a little bit of that, then that ultimately is what drives them to move. I asked them once, actually, Tony Robbins asked me to ask them this. I was talking to him, he goes, ask these two questions for me, because I offered to do that. And one of the questions he asked is like, what happens when you die? And so I asked, like, what happens when you die? And the chief says, well, we move the village. And I'm like, I don't know if you understand my question. I mean, like what happens to me when I die? And he goes, you stay here and we move the village. I'm like, okay, I still don't think you understand what I'm asking. I'm talking about the me, like inside, not my body. And he goes, you're gone. Yeah, you died and we moved the village. And I'm like, well, why do you move the village? And he goes, because you're going to stink. Like, very practical guys, very practical in the way they analyze things.
Wow. Okay. But I guess I was fantasizing and thinking there must be their senses are heightened.
There's no question. I don't want to diminish the idea that they don't all have different levels of intuition. The hunter, the hunters, and particularly the chief, he is an outstanding hunter, and he has powerful intuition. And you can argue whether that intuition is purely energetic or purely physical. And I'd say it's somewhere in the middle. I mean, you have to be good at tracking. You have to know how long that print has been there, what direction it's running, and how big is it, how many are there. Like he knows that stuff. He's the smells that are subtle on the wind that you and I would not necessarily detect, but he gets them. So he's got heightened senses, and as a consequence of that, likely a heightened sense of intuition about where to hunt that day. And I would suggest the women have the same thing around water collection and ripening trees and all that kind of stuff. And I would put to you, if we're going to talk like sort of in a sense evolutionary psychology, I would suggest to you that one of the reasons that women have greater emotional intelligence, and they do, I don't care what they just do. And I think one of the reasons they do, it's very simple, is that men's behavior, their survival has been largely dependent on their physical capacity for strength and speed and accuracy in hunting. And women's survival has been dependent on their ability to predict the behavior and control and influence the behavior of the men in their lives. It's always been that way. Men barely notice facial expressions. Like, men can see when each other are smiling or gritting their teeth, but women can notice pupil dilation. Like women, I always joke, like if you're having a say an argument with a woman, it's really important that you maintain the eye contact, because if you even look away for a second, she go, "Are you listening?" Because women are like noticing the tiniest, slightest little things, because for millions of years, their survival depended on their capacity for predicting the behavior and manipulating the behavior. I don't mean manipulating in a negative sense, but getting what they needed from the men around them. So I think women have an evolved right to their increased sense of intuition and emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Would you say the difference also, it sounds like the difference between the Hadza tribe and the civilization that we're all a part of, right? The urban modern day civilization is our disconnection from our innate abilities, right? Because we rely too much on modern day things and we disconnect from nature, which is who we are, right? Our own nature.
Yeah, you know, I can give you, there's so many examples of the evolution gap. Once you understand the principle, you can spot them. You will start to spot them after this conversation. I'll give you some examples. One is wisdom teeth. So I had my wisdom teeth growing out into my jaw. So my dentist says, you're going to have to take them out. And I'm like, oh, whoa. Surgery is the last call for me. Always surgery is the last call. And so why do I have to have surgery? And he goes, because your teeth are growing sideways into your mouth and they're hurting the hell out of you. And I go, yeah, but why are they growing sideways into my mouth? Am I broken? Did God or evolution design me badly? Like, what is going on with this? And it really, really bothered me. And I refused, until I could solve this, I didn't want anybody cutting me open. And so I went on a really deep meditation about this. Like I really thought about it for a long time. And at one point I really sat down and went through this. And I thought to myself, well, Jesus, think of the pain that our ancestors had to go through when their wisdom teeth came in. I mean, what did they do? They didn't know how to cut them out. What were they going to? And then I was like, wait a second, this tooth here, it's not real. Knocked out. You know, I'm a Canadian kid. You'd like to think it was ice hockey. It wasn't. But the point is that, you know, that tooth isn't real. And by the way, you try this the next time you're out for dinner with 8 or 10 friends, assuming you're not stuck in lockdown mode, but you understand, ask your friends, how many of you are missing a front tooth? And I'll tell you that it's something like 20% of the population is walking around missing a front tooth. And we live in the safest, least traumatic times in the history of ever. So you got to think that if you double the level of danger in our world, you double the level of teeth knocking out. And the world the Hadza live in is not double dangerous as ours. It's 10 times as dangerous, which means arguably 10 times as many tooth traumas. So guess what? You're hunting, you're fighting, you're falling out of a tree, tooth trauma, then your wisdom teeth come in and they respace your mouth. And then they don't have to grow sideways into your jaw. But what we do is go, well, I want my smile to be perfect. So we drill another tooth up in there so we don't need the wisdom teeth. That's an example of the evolution gap. It's not a terrible thing, but when you understand it, now you know why you have to have your wisdom teeth cut out and you don't feel bad about it anymore. Mm-hmm. A more subtle but very powerful concept is everybody's talking about cortisol these days. You know, you got to be careful with your cortisol. Nobody talks about what cortisol actually does. It's the stress chemical. But what does it do? And I'm amazed that this isn't discussed. Like, what does it do? Well, cortisol has a couple of really interesting jobs, but 2 of them are to constrict your blood vessels and to release coagulants into your blood to slow your blood down in the event of an injury. In other words, when you trip and you start to fall, your body is already producing cortisol to prevent you from having too serious an injury. In other words, your optimal blood viscosity is actually quite low so that your blood can move around your body really nicely and oxygenate you really well. When you're about to have an injury, your body goes, boom, slow down the blood. And so the blood all slows down. So if you do bruise yourself or cut yourself, you're less likely to bleed out internally or externally. Also, then on top of that, adrenaline counteracts against this and causes increased heart contraction in order to push the blood out to the places that it's harder to get to. Because if you didn't do that, you'd pass out. And then adrenaline also, as we all know, sends extra strength to the muscles. Now, I will just stop for a second. You're walking along and you see a lion. And as you know, I think you know this about me, but that is not a theoretical for me. That's not hypothetical. It has happened to me a number of times. One time it was 14 lions. Walked into a riverbed, there are 14 lions. At that moment, what do? You go, and your body goes, oh my God, that intake of breath means danger. And the images in my head mean danger. And your body starts producing cortisol and adrenaline to help you to fight or flight and what have you. But that cortisol is there to stop you from bleeding out. Okay, fast forward 200,000 years and you get a legal summons from a lawyer. You slow your blood down and increase your strength exponentially. And by the way, the more cortisol and adrenaline you have in your system, the less logic you have. You lose logic and you also lose empathy. You lose empathy when you're terrified. So the more cortisol and adrenaline you have, the less empathy you have. Oh, by the way, if you live in America, I think you can see that there's an entire overdoing of adrenaline and cortisol at the moment, which is why the left and the right are so far from each other at the moment, because there's no empathy in the equation anymore. And so now you get the legal summons, you look at it, your blood starts thickening up, your heart is pounding, you've got extra strength. This is not the ideal way to reply to a summons. Like, it just isn't. That's an example. Again, our nervous system evolved for actual danger, not theoretical danger. But now our nervous system responds to theoretical danger as though we're actually in danger. And no wonder we're suffering with disease, because most people are running with cortisol slowed, thickened blood every day, not just because they saw a lion one day.
So that's a great point you just said. And my question is, how is it that the Hadza tribe people don't have burnout if they're running from lions and chasing lions every day? How is that?
Well, the issue is this: they're built for that. Mm-hmm. Now imagine that there was some human being that was like evolved for the emotional stresses of social media and legal summonses and visa bills, right? Put them with the Hadza, they're going to freak the hell out, right? Like they're not going to be able to handle that. But the truth is, and most of us now wouldn't, because our innate system wouldn't let us anymore. We'd be too scared because we don't know. In their case, this is what happens. They see a lion. Okay, kill it or run or hide a tree, right? Then you go home. How was your hunting trip? It was pretty scary. I saw a lion. Oh, how you feeling now? Fine. Now, average person in America today, how was your day today? I saw a lion. I saw a lion. Did the lion hurt you? It might have. 7 years later, you're on the therapist's couch going, I just can't get that lion out of my head. Right? And I'm making light of a very serious thing. But yes, the truth is that the reason we have these problems is that we have this Paleolithic nervous system in this vastly and massively changing civilization, and it's not working for us. So the Hadza, by the way, I asked the chief, I said, do you guys have depression? They have no word for that. So now I have to define it, right? Like through the translator. No. Okay. Are people ever very, 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 very sad for a very, very, very long time? Best way I could think to describe depression. So he says, no, why would they do that? It's like, no, why? And I go, well, something really serious happens and they're sad about it for a really long time. Like their relative dies or something and they're sad for a very long time. And he goes, no, we can be sad for a day or two, maybe 3, but then you just got to get on with your life. Well, guess what? In our world, you have a huge breakup, you lose a loved one, something terrible happens in your life, and now everybody gives you sympathy, and they start taking care of you, and they give you food, and you don't have to go to work for 2 weeks, and all this kind of stuff, which creates permission for you to dwell in it. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't cleanse our emotions. I'm just describing the way it is today. In their case, you're sad for one day. Everybody's got some tolerance for that, but the fact is that survival of the tribe depends on everybody performing at their best. So if you're not performing at your best, they got to carry you for a day or two. By the time you're whinging around on the 3rd day, they're like, dude, we're not feeding you anymore. You're going to have to do something. And then, by the way, their life would force them to get up and move. And that would flow blood through their system and oxygenate them. And that would begin. Instead, we have people lying around sitting on the couch watching Netflix to try to know. Right. So then I go, well, hold on a minute. All right. That, that sounds sensible to me. That makes sense to me. I said, do you guys have suicide? What is suicide? Oh, in our culture out there, people occasionally end their own lives. They kill themselves. The chief, the look on his face is like this. And there's a guy in the back of the cave sleeping on an animal skin, and he's obviously not sleeping. And this is all on camera, by the way, so I can't wait to actually show this to people. But he's at the back of the cave sleeping on an animal skin, but he's listening on the conversation. And when he hears me say that people occasionally kill themselves, he busts out laughing. Listen, please, nobody come and write to me about how insensitive this is. They don't understand. He just busts out. He's like, they do what? Like on purpose? They have no idea. It would never even occur to them that could happen. So the chief's like, how do they do it? Good question, right? If you've never contemplated this, you're going to be curious. And funny enough, that whole day we'd spent making poison for hunting. He'd been teaching us. It's a whole day process. So I said to him, well, some people shoot themselves with a gun, and he knows they don't have guns, but they know what they are, and they're terrified of them. And he's like, what? He couldn't think of anything more devastating than that. Then I said, well, and some people jump off really high things. What? Like they climb up trees to get honey. They are terrified of falling. Why would anybody do that? And I go, and some people poison themselves. And he goes, I guess if you have to, that's the way to do it. Like he already had his own primary choice, but it had never occurred to them. And again, it's because the things that they stress about are the things that we evolved to stress about. The things that we stress about are brand new to us. When somebody is freaking out about a legal summons, it poses in most of our cases, it poses no actual danger to them. Nobody's coming around to kill them. Nobody's taking their food away. And yet they will produce all the chemicals that suggest injury is near.
Do you think the difference between these two types of worlds, we should say, is the sense of community? They have this sense of community where they're all part of one another. And we have this disconnect, us in our rooms versus them. It's this world outside of ourselves, right? We're not part of this world where they are. Yes. Yeah.
There's no question about that there's a very powerful sense of community. Oddly, the men and women barely interact with each other at all. The men have one fire, the women have another fire, and they barely speak to each other. It's like two tribes living as roommates, but the social bond is still very strong, and the social bond within the genders is very strong. And as an example, parenting there is a very different world than parenting in our world. First of all, they are, if a 2-year-old is walking toward the fire, then you're sitting there going, hey, that kid's walking toward the fire. And they're like, yeah. And that's because that child has to learn to live with fire. So preventing it from hurting itself on the fire is just delaying the inevitable. It's going to do it one day. The sooner it can have that lesson, the more likely it is it's not going to do that. Now, of course, we live in a world with electric sockets that can kill people and traffic and stuff. So we have to be a little bit more controlled in that. But the truth of the matter is they don't regard children as children. They regard children as diminutive adults. So they will only help a child insofar as the child can't do something because of its limitations of size and height and strength and stuff like that. But otherwise, they don't treat them that way. They just treat them. They don't see them as different. They don't raise them. They simply do what they can to feed them until they can feed themselves. And what's part of all that is I dare you to show up there and try and tell me which child belongs to which adult. It's very difficult. You can. The child definitely does favor their parents slightly. So if you're watching over a week, you'll see the pattern. But generally speaking, it's clear that the entire tribe is raising the children. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see.
That's beautiful.
In fact, the way I choose to live today, I live in a place in the Dominican Republic, and it's a kiteboarding community. And all of us along this beach, there's tons of us that are parents with kids ranging from brand new to about teens, right? And the kids all run around on the beach freely, just like we used to when we were kids. Like they have the same life we did. And all the parents, like, here's a great example. Zoe, who's only 4, was playing at a party, and there's another kid there who's probably, 12 or no, he's not 12. I mean, 9. I'm getting my kids mixed up. And they're kind of fighting. And at one point he just gets a little out of control and he backhands her through the face. She's 4. She falls down on the ground. Now she's tough as nails. So she gets up and she'll tell me later, he hit me and I didn't cry. Like she's got this like tough as nails attitude about it, but that does not change the shock and horror I felt as a parent. Now, every bit of my DNA wants to walk up to the kid and go bam through the face, right? Like, what the hell did you just do to my daughter? But instead I took him aside and I said, hey, you're a lot bigger than her, right? Yeah. So you're stronger than her, right? Yeah. So is it really fair for you to use all your strength when you're wrestling with her? Why not? I said, why don't you and I wrestle for a little bit? And so we wrestled for a little bit and we're playing. And every now and again, I just he'd throw a punch and hit me in the arm. And then I'd throw a punch and hit him in the arm. Just a tiny little harder than he was comfortable with. And he'd go, oh, and I go, what's really scary is I can do that about 20 times harder than that. He goes, what do you mean? So we grab a big yoga ball and I hold it and I go, you hit it as hard as you can. And he hits it. And then I say, now you hold it and I'll hit it. And I hit it and he goes flying. And I go, do you understand now? And he goes, and we have a great relationship. The kids are learning from all these different parents, and my kids are learning from there. It's such a beautiful way, and it's one of the watching the Hadza is one of the reasons that inspired me to want to live like this.
Wow, that's amazing, and that's actually what brings us. Besides the diet, which I'm sure you'll share in a moment, but what would you say are some of the takeaways of why? What is missing in our society that we can incorporate? And I think that was one of the examples, right? But also, I love when you said that they probably don't even realize there's no fear of, right? That's why they have no fear frequency for their immune system.
Fear for them is the way fear is supposed to be. And that is that for the most fear should be short-term and immediate. Now, of course, if you know there's a big storm coming or there's a tribe threatening to invade you, then you would start producing, like call it chronic fear as you prepared for that situation. But generally in their life and in their day-to-day lives, any fear that they deal with is immediate. It's an immediate thing. And for us, what we do is take this one thing and we worry about it and worry about it and worry about it. So one of the, and by the way, there's a great exercise you can do for this. I'm sure you guys know this, but I just love it. You take a look at all the stuff you've ever worried about. Take everything you've ever worried about, write it down. Everything you can think of that you've ever worried, write it down. And then take a pen and cross out all the shit that didn't happen. And I'll tell you what, it's always more than 90%. Right. Now you take a look at what did happen and put a star behind all the things that you worried about that did happen that ended up being total gifts to you. And I pretty much guarantee you it's 90% of what's left, which means that less than 1% of what you're worried about actually hurt in a bad way. And for many people, it's zero. For many people, they do this exercise like there's literally nothing I ever worried about that hurt me. It hurt me in the moment maybe, but it was strong for me, right? And I think they're good at that. They're really good at that. And I think we need to get better at that. When something comes along and freaks you out, somebody writes a yucky comment on Facebook or somebody cuts you off in traffic and all that, we let that stuff linger because we have the luxury of letting it linger. But if you had to go and hunt every day to survive, you just wouldn't have time for that. And so partly there's a mental discipline we can create. But I think another thing that's really important about this, and it really does come back to this issue of diet. You know, when you're talking about immune response, sure, your psychology is important to your immune response. No question about that. But recently somebody wrote to me on Instagram and asked me like, well, yeah, but you know, your immune response and your health is so much about your spiritual connection and it's so much about your vibration, all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, you know, but I still think that you got to consider your nutrition as the primary thing. And they're like, no, the spiritual, that would affect even what you ate. And if you eat stuff with good spiritual energy, okay, go hold your breath for 5 minutes feeling spiritual. Let's see how that works out for you. Yeah. You know, the body has physical requirements. And if the physical requirements are not being met, I don't care how spiritual you are, there's going to be a problem. And so one of the big things that the Hadza have over all of us is that their environment is the environment that we evolved our nutritional needs in. Right? So in other words, they breathe properly and deeply all the time. They don't do this shallow desk breathing thing that we do. They are constantly, every single day, being forced to breathe. The women are digging and lifting and carrying and walking and talking, and they're constantly having to breathe properly. The men are out there hunting and climbing and digging. They're constantly being forced to breathe properly. They also eat very water-rich foods and drink whenever they can. They stay as hydrated as they possibly can. They also have a fat burning metabolism. They only burn sugar for short moments a year when the fruit's in season or when the honey is found. But for the most part, their body is running on the proper human fuel system, which is fat. So they have constant streams of energy. Incidentally, one of the best things anybody can do for their immune system is to switch from being a sugar burner to a fat burner. The simplest way I can describe this to you is that when somebody burns sugar primarily, and by sugar, I mean carbohydrates. If carbohydrates are their primary fuel, then that means that when they run a little low, say at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and the brain starts to feel foggy, then if you think about this, if your brain is foggy, don't you think you've lowered your shields too? Like as your body is redirecting energy around the body, it's going, well, I got to get the heart going. I got to get the lungs going. Okay, take energy away from the brain. Well, long before it would take energy away from the brain, it would take energy away from the innate immune system. So a sugar burner is constantly taking their shields up and down, which is creating openings for diseases to attack. These guys, they're burning fat all the time. So their shields are basically up all the time. The only time their shields come down is when they're encountering a lion, and then their fear comes up and their cortisol comes up. And during that time, their body is tasking for injury prevention and healing and not pathogen defense. But that lasts for a few hours and then boom, they're back to pathogen defense. Mm-hmm. Same with food. These guys eat the food that they evolved to eat, and it's seasonal. It's seasonal. They can't eat the same vegetable every day. They can't eat the same thing every day. So to the degree we can learn, and that's really what we've done at my company, we've rewilded people. We've said we need to like rewild your diet so that you are eating and living in a way that's much more in accordance with what your DNA is looking for. If you satisfy your body's physical needs, it is a lot easier to be psychologically balanced and spiritually connected and immune.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, it actually makes me think now why, because we've had a few comments after we measured the frequency of the immune system of the vegetarians or vegans. Mm-hmm. It was a fear frequency also 100. And what you just shared actually makes sense.
Yeah, you know, I want you to know many people who have done our WILDFIT programs choose to be vegetarians and vegans, and I'm agnostic. I'm not anti-vegan, but what I am is anti-ideologue. I'm anti-ideological vegans, and the reason is that if you are ideological about anything, then you're going to be willing to sacrifice the truth and your health at the feet of your food ideology. Mm-hmm. And so if somebody is going to choose to become a vegan, what they have to recognize, this is not an option, although many of them think it is. You have to recognize that you are making a decision for whatever reason to eliminate a nutritionally significant macro from your diet, something that our ancestors have been eating for millions of years. We've developed a dependency upon it. And if you choose not to eat it, you're going to have to do something about that. But they are so ideological about it, many of them, that they don't accept that truth. And they go, no, humans have never, there's never in the history of humanity been a multi-generational veganism experimentation. Never. India is trying a version of it now, and even most of them aren't vegans. They consume dairy products, which may not be ideal, but at least they have all the amino acids and they've got the vitamin B12 and all that kind of stuff. So vegans are missing real, like, here's an example. By the way, I speak as a reformed vegan. I was vegan for many, many years. And so here's one of the things. When you become a vegan, all the meat eaters are going, well, you know, where are you going to get your protein from? And then you're going to quote some really fancy statistics like breast milk is about 6% protein and so is fresh fruit. Therefore, all I have to do is enough fruit and I'm going to get my protein. But that comes from a general misunderstanding about what proteins are. And like, for example, you probably know this, but most people don't. Insulin is a protein. Antibodies are a protein. Proteins are complex molecules built out of amino acids. So you can't just go eat any protein. You have to eat all the amino acids, or at least all the essential ones, in order to make them. So the average vegetarian who has not done the average vegan particularly who has not taken this into account is slowly but surely depleting their amino acid inventory, which is making it harder for them to produce things like insulin. It's making harder for them to produce healthy sperm and eggs. It's making harder for them to produce antibodies, which makes them more susceptible to disease, hence reduced immunity.
Great.
I'm not saying you can't be healthy and be a vegan. I'm saying that to do it requires serious thought, supplementation, and consideration.
Yes, amino acid supplementation, definitely. No, it makes sense. So most of the diet predominantly for Hadza tribe would be high protein, would you say?
You know, it's crazy. If you go out onto the internet and you search this, you will find already the ideologues who are going out there and saying that the Hadza are plant-based. They are absolutely not plant-based. Okay, they're plant-based because most of the animals they eat plants. But the truth is that they are primarily focused on meat. And here's a way I can describe this for you. If we're out hunting, but we're not tracking anything. See, hunting is kind of made up of travel to the place where you're going to be hunting, but keep an eye out for opportunity. Then get to the place where you believe the opportunity is and pay a lot more attention. Then notice spoor or tracks and now start tracking. That make sense? Mm-hmm. If you are in the first couple of stages where you're just traveling to the hunting ground or traveling to where you plan to hunt, then they're also keeping an eye out for berries, honey, root vegetables. And they may stop and dig those things up or pick them from the trees and eat them. But I will tell you that once they are tracking something, there could be a mango tree ripe with perfect mangoes on it, and they are going to go right past it because their primary focus is on meat. If they had to give up anything, it would not be meat. I asked them once, has anybody ever in the Hadza community given up meat? And he again looked at me like I was insane because it is the one thing you cannot live without. And by the way, there's truth to that because there are multiple times in where there are no times ever in human history where humans were multi-generationally vegan. There are multiple times in human history where people had to survive on only meat. For example, the North America, the natives of North America, and by natives, what I mean is that let's call them the first peoples. Technically, anybody born in North America is a native of North America, but you know what I mean? I mean what we used to refer to as the Indians, the first peoples of North America and South America. Where did they come from? They came across from Asia and they crossed the strait, right? They came through the north. There are no plants there. And they didn't do it in a weekend. It took them ages to cross that. And there's no plants, which means for multi-generations, they ate only meat. They survived on meat, seal, fish, whale blubber. They survived multi-generations. Now, I'm not saying that that's optimal, but what I'm saying is that meat is a really important part of our diet. And if you're going to choose not to have it for some reason, which I totally get, there are reasons, you gotta take the right steps. Mm-hmm. And that's probably what you're seeing in your measurements, that the people who are not taking those right steps.
Interesting. Yes, absolutely. So if you were to leave people with one last thing about Hadza tribe and what they can do to incorporate in their everyday life, what would that be?
That's really tough. There's so much. There's so much because there's these psychological principles and there's emotional principles. And then there's obviously these nutritional principles. But I'll tell you the one thing that I would make sure that everybody does is make a concerted, I'm going to give you two. Make a concerted effort to spend way more time in nature because it recalibrates you. When you go into the trees and you breathe that air and you have that sun on your skin and all that stuff, it does recalibrate you. And by the way, almost anybody that I've ever taken to Africa, and I've taken many, many hundreds of people over the last whatever years, from friends to clients that have gone. And here's the thing. Many of them will tell you that the minute they walk back into civilization, civilization feels evil and evil and wrong. You can imagine you're out there in nature and the wind is blowing and the animals noise and the birds are in the trees. And it's just like your DNA is going, oh yeah. Oh yeah. And then you walk into the duty free in Heathrow Airport and it's all tobacco and digitally altered women in bikinis and alcohol and sugar. And immediately your senses are like, ah! And so it's really important that we go out into nature to recalibrate. Like, look, you're outside in the bright and you come inside and the room is dark until your eyes adjust. Mm-hmm. Same thing with sugar. You know this. Somebody gives up sugar for a few days, suddenly broccoli starts tasting sweet to them because they've recalibrated their taste buds. Same thing with your entire nervous system. Go out into nature, recalibrate so that you can come back into civilization with a more honest appraisal of what's going on around you. And then the second thing is this. Imagine that the three of us were going to go on a long drive. You guys are in Florida, right? Mm-hmm. So imagine we're going to drive from Florida to Vancouver. It's going to be a hell of a drive. What is that going to take? If we share the driving and we never stop except for gas, it's going to take us 5, 6 days, 7 days, maybe more even. It's a long drive. So what are we going to do right away? We're going to check that the car is full of gas. It's full of oil. The oil is fresh. The brake fluid's topped up. The automatic fluid's topped up. The tire pressure's on. The alignment's right. We're going to make sure that the vehicle is in optimal condition for the trip. So do that. Make sure the vehicle is in optimal condition for the trip. Make sure that you are breathing, hydrating, getting your sunlight, sleeping, making sure that you're getting the right energy, the right non-energy nutrients. Make sure that you're moving your body. And by the way, moving your body, everybody talks about moving your body because you got to build your muscles and you got to get your cardiovascular and you got to keep your flexibility. Yes, those are the 3 pillars of exercise, but they are not the most important reason for exercising. The most important reason for moving your body is that your cardiovascular system is urgent and important, and therefore it has 2 pumps. It has the diaphragm and a heart because it's urgent and important, but your lymphatic system is not urgent. It is only important. So we never evolved a pump for it. And the only way we move cleansing, immune system functioning, lymphatic system around our body is by muscle, but by the contraction and expansion of our tissues in our body. And so we have to move. If we take care of all those needs, then we operate, then our immune systems operate significantly better. No question about it.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. I always say, we go to kickboxing twice a week and I call it my health insurance.
That's right. So, health insurance and personal safety insurance. I love it.
Yes. What do you work out every day?
I do pretty much every day. And I also live on the beach. So pretty much every day I walk on the beach and I work out generally 5 days a week. And it's funny because I have friends of mine like, you don't have to do that. You can optimize and work out once a week for 30 minutes. And like, listen, I'm not exercising for my ego. I'm exercising for my health.
Right.
The fact that it makes my ego feel good, that's a bonus.
That's right.
Oh, Eric, thank you so much for today. This is so much fun.
Oh, it's been a blast. I will tell you, I've been so inspired by this that I finally, with all the work that we've done with WILDFIT around the world, I've had a number of my friends sort of criticize me for not having a WILDFIT book. And then I like to remind them, I lost you. Then I like to remind them that we've had almost 40,000 people do our program in 130 countries around the world with far more impact than any book could ever have. But I finally found the book that I really, really wanted to write about this. And it's all about a wilder life. It's about rewilding your circumstances, your life, your conditions, not just about food, but your lifestyle to create optimal immune response, optimal emotional balance, optimal spiritual connection. And I've never been more passionately motivated by any bit of creativity that I've ever had. So this topic is my number one thing to think about these days.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Great. And it's so needed right now is more than ever.
Yeah, no question.
People are looking into longevity. People are talking and researching this topic, but I would say there's a key in all the experience that you've had with Hadza. Well, now that you know, because we measured the frequencies of it too, so you can run with it for sure.
You know, I will say this last thing about them, that, you know, it is really important that we don't overly romanticize them. They are now facing things like refined flour and vegetable oil that the missionaries are giving them, and it's starting to have an impact. Some of them have now been affected by alcohol, and that's tough. You know, their way of life is ending quickly, and that's sad. And it makes me very grateful for the decade of experiences I've had with them. Actually, I'll show you guys something here.
Yeah, please.
On my last trip there, the chief gave this to me. It's a proper like Hadza. You can see animal skill. I don't know how I got it through customs, frankly, but you know, it's like, it's a proper Hadza bow. And you know, this is, you know,
amazing.
They don't exist anymore, you know, and they won't very long. And I think that what we want to do today is recognize that of all the people that I've ever met anywhere in the world, they are the most consistently fulfilled and happy people I've ever seen by far. And I think there's something very powerful to be learned from that.
Yes.
Yes, without a doubt.
Yes. And you said that you actually are putting a film together. Yes.
We've been there several times shooting, you know, shooting lots of video of our various trips. And so we're going to be releasing a variety of different films. I interviewed a bunch of, I had a bunch of people send me questions to interview the Hadza, and I collected some really interesting questions from, you know, like Bruce Music from Love at First Fight, Shelley Lefko from the Lefko Method, like different people that do different cool, Jay Shetty sent some interview questions. So that's one video that's going to be coming out. And then there's some other stuff that we haven't quite figured out how exactly we're going to release it. But we're definitely working on how are we going to share this wisdom with the world in the most impactful way.
Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you, Eric, so much.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Keep up the good work.
Yes, thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.